Okay, students, let's continue with our chapter of ecology, relationship of organism with one another and with the environment. In the last lesson, we went through trophic levels. Today, we have to see first the feeding relationships, and then we will go through ecological pyramids. We'll continue with this chapter now. Feeding relationships shows the relationship of feeding between the trophic levels, and at the base of this feeding relationship lies our producers are all autotrophs. Autotrophs can be plants, they can be algae that can produce their own food, but here we are considering plants, so they trap sunlight. As you can see in the diagram, sunlight is trapped by the autotrophs by chlorophyll in them, and it is converted to carbohydrates or glucose, which it produces with the release of oxygen. The raw material or the reactant are carbon dioxide and water. Producers make the bottom of the food chain. Next are the consumers. These are all heterotrophs. They ingest ready-made complex that is coming from the producers. These consumers can be herbivores, they can be carnivores, omnivores, and decomposers. First consumer that we are looking into are herbivores. These are the animals or organisms that rely on plant. Then are the predators. These are again consumers, but they hunt their prey. The food that is being taken would be prey, and the one who's getting the food would be called as a predator. It can be animal, and there are some other example in plants also which are predators. Next are consumers, which are carnivores. They eat up flesh. Now it depends whether they hunt their prey first and then eat the meat, or they feed on the dead decaying flesh of the animals, that are scavengers. So both of these types would be carnivores, that are organisms or animals that depend upon the meat or the flesh or protein. Then are the consumers called omnivores, which eat both plants and animals. Then are the consumers also called as decomposers. This is a very important topic, as decomposers are involved in decomposing the dead decaying matter of plants and animals both, clearing up the dead bodies of plants and animals from the earth and making them useful again to the producers. What do? They break down the complex compounds of dead and decaying plants and animals into simpler molecules that can be absorbed by the plants. The major decomposers on the earth are fungus and bacteria. Okay, here is a look on how decomposers work. If you see here, the sunlight is being trapped by the producer. It is transferred, the energy is transferred to first trophic level, that is the primary consumer, then to secondary, tertiary, and quaternary. And when all these organisms die, or if this producer die, all this dead decaying matter comes into the soil, and now this dead decaying matter contains protein, fats, carbohydrates, but these complex organic molecules cannot be consumed directly by the producers again, so they should be broken down into simpler compounds, carbohydrates to glucose, proteins to amino acid, nitrate and nitrite ions, and fats to fatty acid and glycerol. And then these smaller molecules, diffusible molecules, these simpler nutrients are then absorbed by the producers again. So this cycle continues because of this decomposer, which converts the complex molecules into simpler ones so that they can be absorbed by the plants. Then is the relationship of parasitism and mutualism. Parasites are those organisms that feed on the host. Host would be any organism, it may be animal or a plant, over which the parasite feed. In this relationship, the host gets the harm and the parasite gets the benefit. For instance, you have read about aphids that feed on the stems of the plant. They take up amino acid and glucose from the phloem. The host, which is the plant, gets damaged because the amino acid and glucose, the sucrose, all of the nutrients are taken from it, while the parasite, which is the aphid, gets the benefit. On the other hand, there is another feeding relationship called mutualism. Here both the species get benefit. If you see here, this is the example called lichen. Lichen is a combination of algae and fungus. So what happens is that algae is the photosynthesizing organism. It's green, so it produces carbohydrates. On the other hand, the mycelium of the fungus attaches itself to the substrate or the ground. The fungus will absorb the nutrients and will transfer it to algae. Algae has chlorophyll, so it will do photosynthesis and will produce glucose. That glucose will be taken up by fungus also. So in this relationship, both fungus and algae gets the benefit. Fungus will absorb the raw material or the nutrients from the substrate. Substrate is the material over which it is growing. So fungus would take up those nutrients and will give it to algae, and algae will do photosynthesis because it has chlorophyll and will transfer its produced food material to fungus also. Now we have to go through the ecological pyramids. What are these ecological pyramids? These are the graphic representation of trophic structure and functioning of ecosystem, starting with producers at the base and successive trophic levels forming the apex. So it's a graphic representation like I have shown you here. It will show you how the energy, the mass or the number of the organism vary according to the trophic levels. So this is the first trophic level at the base and it is showing you the producer. The higher trophic levels will be above it, making a apex. Okay, there are number of pyramids. First, we have to discuss pyramid of numbers. What pyramid of numbers shows? It shows the number of organism of a population at each trophic level. It will show you the number of organism or individuals of a population at each trophic level. Typically, it is broader at the base and gets narrower at the top. I have given you the example here. So if you are showing the number, the producer would have the greatest number. It is lying at the base and has the highest number. Then would be primary consumer, and then the secondary, and then the tertiary. So if you see, it is making up a traditional pyramid which is broader at the base and gets narrow as you move up higher into the higher trophic levels. So number is decreasing as you move up, but it is not the case always. This is a typical pyramid, but it gets inverted also. How it gets inverted, let's see in the next slide. So if you see here, it is again a pyramid of number, but it is not a traditional pyramid. It is not broader at the base and gets narrower at the top. It gets inverted when there is an parasitism involved in it. For example, this is a oak tree and here many aphids or caterpillars or any other parasite might be feeding on this tree. The number of tree would always be lesser compared to the parasite that are feeding over it. So if you see that I have drawn a smaller block here with the number of parasites or caterpillars feeding on this tree being greater in number than the tree. Now the birds that are feeding on these parasites would be lesser, and then the blackbirds would be lesser, greater than the buzzard. So if you see that I have drawn the pyramid traditionally from caterpillars to upward, but the number of caterpillar is greater than the tree. It is because of a common observation that the number of host would always be less than the number of parasite. So when you make pyramid of numbers, take care of the fact that your chain contains a parasite or not. If it does not, your pyramid would be a traditional pyramid like this one. But if it does, make sure that the number of host is less compared to the number of parasites attached to it. Then is biomass pyramid. It shows you the total mass of living matter in each trophic level at any one time. It is similar to that of pyramid of numbers that you make traditionally. It is broader at the base, and as you move upward it gets narrower. So this is the common observation that mass of or living matter decreases as you move higher into the higher trophic levels. Next is pyramid of energy. This is again very important point of this chapter. You have to understand the fact that about 90% of the energy is lost from one trophic level to the next, and only 10% is passed on to the next higher trophic level. Why it happens that why energy is lost? Not just a small amount, but 90% of the energy is lost. It is lost because of heat during respiration at every trophic level. It is lost because of egestion, the undigested matter which is removed from the body of the consumers. It is lost because of excretion, homeostasis. Homeostasis is maintenance of internal constant environment, and to do so the consumer needs to have energy. If a consumer is able to control its body temperature, its sugar levels or its temperature, it needs to have energy. Then the consumer may also be moving around or singing, or like a bird sings or move. So the movement also requires energy. Growth. The consumer which has taken the food from the producer will also make new protoplasm in its body. So new protoplasm formation requires energy. Then there are some other metabolic activities which require energy. For example, transmission of nerve impulses, they also require energy. So these are the points due to which energy is lost when it is transferred from one trophic level to another. Here is a graphical representation. Let's say the producer got 100% energy from the sun. This energy from producers to primary consumer will be lost by 90%, and only 10% would be transferred to consumer 1, and then again 90% will be lost and 1% would be transferred to consumer 2, which is the secondary consumer. So what we conclude from this diagram, that greatest amount of energy is lost from producers to primary consumer. The most energy lost in a food chain is when the energy is transferred from producers to primary consumers. Then we also notice that shorter the food chain, more energy is available to the final consumer. If I will prolong this food chain, more energy will be lost on every step. So if you will keep the food chain shorter, more energy would be available to the last consumer or the final consumer or the final trophic level.